Get your black ass out of my station before I drag you out myself!
A deputy in full uniform barked it out to a woman standing alone in the lobby on her very first day. She was dressed in plain clothes. Testing the department's integrity, she stayed completely calm.
I have a meeting here this morning.
You have no business here! Meeting? Look at you! You're nothing but a roach that wandered into the wrong kitchen, thinking you actually belong in a place like this. Now scatter!
He sneered, aggressively, leaning forward to push his face directly into hers, intentionally invading her personal space to intimidate her.
I have every right to be here, officer.
And that killed the laughter in his throat instantly. Having already deactivated his body cam, he grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the door.
You're coming with me. Now!
Take your hands off me.
Move it!
The sound cut through the lobby like a whip crack. He leaned close while she stood there holding her stinging cheek, absorbing the blow with a clenched jaw. 4 people were standing right there. 4 people saw the whole thing happen. Not one of them moved. Not one of them said a word. They just looked away. Unaware a civilian on the bench was secretly recording the encounter. But that officer had just made a fatal mistake. Because the woman he struck was not a helpless target. She was the new commanding officer of that precinct. A seasoned investigator. And she had just seen exactly who she was dealing with. Welcome back to the channel. Let me know in the comments exactly where you are watching this video from today. Now, let's find out how this corrupt department pushed the wrong woman too far. Before we go one step further, I want you to hold on to 3 things. Because everything you are about to watch bends toward them. In 9 days, that single slap would end 3 careers. It would pull a United States Department of Justice civil rights investigation down onto that building, like a roof caving in, and it would put the same hands that just struck her, that grabbed her arm and snapped her head to the side in front of 4 silent witnesses into a photograph the entire county would see. Cuffed behind a deputy's back on the courthouse steps. He had no idea. He took a slow sip of his coffee and walked away like a man who had just taken out the trash. He thought that was the end of it. It was the beginning of the end of everything he had. So, let's rewind. Because to understand how one slap detonated an entire department, you need to know exactly who was standing in that lobby, and exactly what she had already decided before she ever walked through the door. Her name was Danielle Okafor. 44 years old, 19 years in law enforcement across 3 states. This was not a woman who had wandered into a police station by accident. She had a law degree. She had spent 4 years running the Civil Rights and Use of Force Review Division for a state attorney general's office, which is a polite way of saying she had spent 4 years taking apart departments exactly like this one. 1 case file at a time. She had built the evidentiary standard that 6 agencies now use to decide whether an officer's story matched his own body camera. She knew what a clean investigation looked like, because she had written the manual on it, but you would never have known any of that to look at her that morning. Gray wool sweater, dark jeans, a leather satchel so worn at the corners the stitching had started to fray, a pair of small pearl studs. She had parked in the public lot, not the staff lot. She had walked in the front entrance, not the side door. Every single detail was deliberate. Because Danielle Okafor was not visiting the Ashford County Police Department that morning. She was testing it. Now here is the department she walked into. And this is where the rot starts. Ashford County. A mid-sized agency in a mid-sized county. A town called Cedar Hollow. On paper, a sleepy place. In reality, a building that had been decaying from the inside for the better part of a decade. Over the previous 3 years, civilian complaints had climbed. Use of force incidents were up 40%. A state audit had flagged a pattern of racial profiling so blatant it had made the regional news for 2 straight nights. Citizens filed complaints. The complaints went nowhere. People protested. Nothing changed. The old chief, a man named Gordon Estes, had seen exactly where all of this was heading and had done what weak men at the top always do. He announced his retirement and started counting down the days, hoping the whole thing would land on someone else's desk. That left a hole at the top, and the pressure to fill it was enormous. The person applying that pressure was the county executive, a woman named Priya Anand, and she was in a fight for her political life. The community was furious. The department's reputation was in freefall. Anand needed someone who was not part of the old guard, someone who owed nobody in that building a single favor, someone with an internal affairs spine, who knew how to walk into a rotten department and clean house without flinching. She found Danielle Okafor, but Anand did not simply hire her and hand her a nameplate. In their last meeting before the appointment, she made a decision that would change everything. "I don't want you walking in there on your first day with a title," Anand told her. "I want you to walk in like a civilian. No badge. No uniform. Nobody knowing who you are. I want to see how they treat an ordinary person when they think nobody important is watching. Because that," she said, "is the real department. Everything else is a performance for the cameras." And Okafor agreed. "This is the detail that matters. So hold on to it." She agreed to spend her first morning as a fly on the wall. She planned to watch the intake desk. She planned to see how the officers moved through the space, how they talked to the people who came in scared and confused. She planned to observe for a day, maybe 2, and then reveal herself on her own terms. She did not plan to be assaulted in the first 10 minutes. That distinction is the whole engine of this story. She walked in as an observer. She had control of the situation, or she thought she did, and that control was ripped away from her before she ever reached the front desk. The plan failed, which means the harm was real. Remember that when we get to the part where it would be easy to think she had it coming, that she was safe the whole time. She wasn't. She had a plan, and the plan broke on contact. The only person inside that department who knew she was coming was the outgoing chief, Gordon Estes. He was supposed to meet her in the lobby that morning at 7. Walk her back. Keep her comfortable. Estes never showed. He came drifting and almost 2 hours late. And at the time, it looked like nothing more than an old man's bad habits. Later, it would look like something much worse. Now, the deputy who slapped her, his name was Wade Kessler. 13 years on the force. 11 civilian complaints filed against him over those 13 years. 0 sustained. Every single one closed out as unfounded. Insufficient. No further action. Kessler was not just aggressive, he was protected. And to understand how a man collects 11 complaints and keeps his badge shiny, you have to understand the machine that had been built around him. The man who ran that machine was Sergeant Ray Duval. 23 years in, Duval had supervised Kessler for most of his career. And every complaint that came in against Kessler landed on Duval's desk. And on Duval's desk, complaints did not get investigated. They got buried. 4 days. Start to finish. A single page. A signature. A stamp. Case closed. Duval's desk was where accountability in Ashford County went to quietly die. Kessler had a partner too. A younger deputy named Toby Lund. Lund wasn't the one giving orders. He didn't have the meanness in him to invent it himself. But he had learned everything from Kessler: how to talk to people, how to work a call, who to lean on, and who to leave alone. Lund wasn't the trigger. He was the man standing next to the trigger. Every single time. Saying nothing. Kessler acted. Lund backed him. Duval made it disappear. That was the system. And it had worked for years. But it went higher than a sergeant's desk. Because above Ray Duval sat Deputy Chief Marcus Pell, a career administrator who had learned long ago that a quiet department is a promotable department. And a department with sustained complaints is a career-ending headache. And above Pell, off the org chart entirely, sat a county commissioner named Hollis Barnett, who chaired the Public Safety Budget Committee and who had spent 15 years trading favors with men like Pell. Barnett didn't work in that building. He didn't have to. His hand was on the money, and everyone inside knew it. So the full machine looked like this. Kessler swung. Lund watched. Duval buried. Pell smiled and signed off. And Barnett kept the lights on for all of them. 5 layers of protection standing between a bad deputy and any consequence at all. Nobody had ever gotten through all 5. The night before her first day, Danielle Okafor sat alone in a hotel room off the interstate and video called her teenage daughter. Her daughter could always read her. "You nervous?" "Mom." Okafor paused. "Not nervous," she said. "Just tired of having to prove I belong in rooms I built." After she hung up, she opened the worn leather satchel and took out a single sheet of paper, the appointment order, signed by Priya Anand. She read it once, closed it, and set it on the nightstand next to the alarm clock. She had no idea what tomorrow held, but in a way, she had been preparing for it her whole life. The next morning, she got her answer in under 10 minutes. Let's go back to that lobby. Because what you saw a minute ago was the highlight reel. Now, I'm going to walk you through every second of it. And I promise you, it is worse than it looked. Danielle Okafor pushed open the glass doors of the Ashford County Police Department at 11 minutes after 7 in the morning. Early on purpose, she wanted to see the building before it filled up. The lobby was exactly what she expected. Scuffed linoleum, fluorescent tubes buzzing overhead, one of them flickering, a bulletproof reception window with a clerk behind it, a woman named Rhonda who had worked that desk for 11 years and had long ago stopped looking up, a row of hard plastic chairs along one wall, half of them cracked, and on the far end of that row, one civilian, an older woman named Deb Alderton, waiting patiently to report a stolen catalytic converter off her Buick. That was it. Quiet. Unremarkable. Okafor stepped up to the reception window. There was a clipboard bolted to the counter. The visitor sign-in sheet. She printed her name in clean block letters. The date. The time. And a single word in the reason column. Appointment. Rhonda slid the clipboard back without a glance. Okafor turned to survey the room. To find a chair. To begin the quiet morning of watching she had come here to do. She never got the chance. The staff door swung open behind her, and 2 deputies walked through, coming in off the parking lot, cutting across the lobby to reach the bullpen. The first was Wade Kessler. Full uniform, coffee in his left hand, badge catching the flickering light. Behind him, Toby Lund. Same uniform, same walk. Kessler clocked her immediately. A black woman in plain clothes. No badge. No lanyard. No visible reason to be standing in the middle of his lobby like she had somewhere to be. He stopped walking. Now you need to understand something about Wade Kessler. And I want to be precise about this. Because it matters. In his mind, this building belonged to him. Not legally. Not on any document. But in every way that a man like Kessler measures ownership, that lobby was his. He decided who was welcome in it. He decided who wasn't. And he had decided about Danielle Okafor before she opened her mouth. But here is the part that most people miss. As he stopped and turned toward her, his free hand drifted up to his chest, to the body camera, clipped there, and he pressed and held the button. 3 seconds. The little indicator light went dark. He did it without breaking stride in his own head. The way you'd flick off a light switch on your way out of a room, 40 seconds before he ever touched her. Wade Kessler turned off the one device in that building designed to keep him honest. He did not know that the ceiling camera in the corner was still running. He did not know it. And he wouldn't have cared. Because he knew that camera had no audio and ran on a 48-hour loop that erased itself. What he could not have known, what nobody could have known, was that Deb Alderton, the woman on the bench, had just slid her phone out of her purse and set it flat on her lap, screen facing outward, and pressed record. She couldn't have told you why. Instinct, a feeling that somebody in that room ought to be paying attention, even if nobody else was going to. Get your black ass out of my station. He said it the way you tell a dog to get off the couch. Flat. Automatics. Like he'd said it 100 times before. And maybe he had. Okafor turned to face him. She did not raise her voice. She did not tense up. She did not do a single one of the things he expected. She just said, evenly, I have a meeting here. Kessler glanced at Lund. Lund smirked. Kessler looked back at her. And a slow, ugly grin spread across his face. A meeting, he repeated. The stray dog thinks it owns the house. Behind the glass, Rhonda watched the whole thing and did not touch the panic button. Did not pick up the phone. Did not say a word. Because she had seen Kessler do a version of this before. Not this bad. But she'd seen it. And she knew, with the certainty of 11 years behind that window, that saying something would only turn his attention onto her. Okafor held her ground. I have every right to be here. Officer, she said. And then, quieter, almost gently, she added the line that would haunt him for the rest of his life. You should have checked the sign-in sheet. Kessler laufte. He actually laughed. To him it was nonsense. The babble of some lost woman, playing important, but that was the moment everything shifted. It wasn't the words. It was the refusal. Kessler was used to people shrinking. Used to civilians dropping their eyes and backing toward the door. He was not used to being looked at levelly by someone who would not move. So he closed the distance and grabbed her by the upper arm. Hard. And pulled her toward the exit. Take your hands off me, she said. Slap. His open palm caught the side of her face and snapped her head to the side. The sound of it, on Deb Alderton's phone, was sharp and close and unmistakable. Skin on skin. And then, low, under his breath, right up against her. He said the word. I'm not going to repeat it. You know the word? It's a single word. The kind that doesn't insult a person so much as try to erase them, to file them under something less than human. The ceiling camera never would have caught it. There was no audio. But Deb's phone caught it clean. Every syllable. And that one word, muttered by a man who thought no one was listening, would eventually be played in a room full of federal attorneys. Here is what Danielle Okafor did in that moment. She closed her eyes. 2 seconds. Her jaw tightened until the muscle stood out along the line of it. That was the whole of her reaction. 2 seconds of a human being absorbing a blow and refusing to let it become a scene. That was the crack in the calm. And then it was gone. But behind that calm, something else was happening. And this is the part I need you to understand. Her mind was a steel trap, and it was snapping shut around every detail. 7:51 in the morning. Deputy W. Kessler. Unit 449. Coffee in the left hand, which means the strike came off the right. 11 prior complaints in a file she had read 3 days ago. This one made 12. She wasn't planning a comeback. She was building a federal civil rights case. piece by piece, in real time. And she had not said a single word about who she was. She said only one more thing. And she said it to no one in particular. Looking at the middle distance while her cheek burned. You should have checked the sign-in sheet. And in the doorway of the bullpen, a black deputy named Simone Carver stood absolutely still. 7 years Carver had been in that building. 7 years she had watched Kessler operate, and swallowed it, and told herself it wasn't her fight. She had just watched him slap a defenseless woman across the face. And every instinct she had screamed at her to step in. To say something. To do anything. And she did nothing. She froze. Her feet would not move. I'm not going to pretend she was a hero in that moment. Because she wasn't. And neither would she. She failed. She stood in the doorway and she failed. Exactly like everyone else in that room, Kessler took a slow sip of his coffee, delivered his line about the roach and the kitchen, and walked back into the bullpen like nothing had happened. No incident report was written. Kessler didn't write one. Lund didn't write one. Rhonda didn't write one. In the official record of the Ashford County Police Department, that morning in the lobby simply did not occur. And the ceiling footage, the one grainy angle that showed the physical contact, was already on a countdown. 48 hours. And it would be gone. Written over by empty hallways. Ray Duvall knew about that overwrite policy. He'd known about it for years. It wasn't a flaw in the system. It was a feature, and he had used it before. That evening, Simone Carver did something she had never done. She sat in the corner of the empty squad room, logged into the department's incident database, and searched for any report filed that day involving the lobby. She scrolled the whole log. Nothing. Not a single line. So she took a screenshot of that empty log and saved it to her personal phone. She didn't know what she was going to do with it. She just knew, in Hergut, that she wanted proof. The silence had been deliberate. Then she called a friend, a black deputy 2 counties over, and sat in her car in the dark. It happened again today, she said, right in front of all of us. And I just stood there. Her friend asked what she was going to do about it. I don't know, Carver said, but I can't keep watching this. At the same time, across town, Wade Kessler was at his kitchen table with a beer and the television on. His wife asked how his day was. He didn't look up. Sama old. Had to deal with some woman making trouble in the lobby. His wife didn't press. He finished the beer, went to bed early, and slept fine. That is the part I want to sit with you. He slapped a woman in a government building. Called her something you can't say on this channel. And then he went home and slept fine. That is not the behavior of a man who is worried. That is the behavior of a man who has never once, in 13 years, faced a consequence. And why would he? The machine had never failed. Back at the hotel, Danielle Okafor was not sleeping. She was ironing a dress uniform, full chief's uniform, pressed sharp, laid out on the bed. Comme un insignia, a polished badge, a nameplate in clean lettering. Okafor. She had taken photographs of her own face that night in the bathroom mirror, the red print of a man's hand still visible along her cheekbone. And she had saved them. Because evidence is evidence, even when it is your own. Then she called her daughter one last time. Mom, did something happen? Okafor paused, one hand resting on the pressed collar. Something happened, she said. But tomorrow, something bigger is going to happen. At 6 o'clock the next morning, an email hit every inbox in the department. It came from the office of the county executive. Subject line, all capitals. Mandatory all hands assembly. 8 A.M. No exceptions. Kessler read it in the locker room and shrugged. Lund asked what it was about. Probably another diversity seminar. Kessler said, and laughed. And a couple of the guys laughed with him. Ray Duval read the same email in his office. And Ray Duval did not laugh. The county executive's direct involvement was unusual. Anand didn't send all-hands emails. Something in the pit of his stomach told him this was not a seminar. He was right. 8 o'clock. The briefing room. 60 deputies, detectives, and staff packed into rows of metal folding chairs. The room smelled like burnt coffee and dry erase marker. The conversation was low and bored and irritated. Nobody wanted to be there on a workday morning. Mandatory meetings were never good news. Kessler sat in the third row. Lund beside him. Both of them leaned back. Legs stretched out. Arms crossed. Kessler nodded at a few guys. Made a crack about overtime. Lund laughed. Duval stood against the back wall. Arms folded. Jaw tight. Not talking to anyone. Just watching the door. On the far side of the room. Alone, said Simone Carver. Her hands were in her lap. She hadn't slept. The screenshot was still on her phone. Burning a hole in her pocket. Then the side door opened, and County Executive Priya Anand walked in with 2 aides behind her. Dark suit. No smile. She walked straight to the podium, set down a folder, and looked out at the room. The conversation died. Not all at once, but row by row, like a wave pulling back from the shore. By the time she opened her mouth, the room was silent. Thank you all for being here. I'll keep this brief. Her voice was steady, official, rehearsed. As you know, Chief Estes has retired. This department has been without permanent leadership for 3 months. That ends this morning. A few deputies shifted in their chairs. After a national search, I have selected a new chief for this department. This individual brings 19 years of law enforcement experience across 3 states, including extensive work in internal affairs, civil rights, and use of force review. Kessler was checking his phone under the armrest. This department has lost the trust of the community it serves. The audit is public. The complaints are public. The person I've chosen was selected specifically because they have the experience, the independence, and the backbone to lead this department through what comes next. The word backbone hung in the air. A few deputies straightened up. Duval's jaw tightened another notch. Please welcome your new chief, Danielle Okafor. A door at the back of the room opened, and she walked in. But this was not the woman from the lobby. This was not the woman in the gray sweater with the frayed satchel. This was not the woman Wade Kessler had grabbed and slapped and called a roach. This was someone else entirely. A full dress uniform, pressed sharp. Command insignia on the collar catching the light. A polished badge on the chest. A nameplate in clean black letters. Okafor. Her posture was straight. Her shoulders were squared. Her face was calm. Composed. Completely unreadable. She carried the worn leather satchel in her left hand. The same one from the hotel. The same one from the lobby. But now it didn't look like a visitor's bag. It looked like exactly what it was. The case file of the woman about to run this building. She walked down the center aisle. Unhurried. Her shoes clicking on the floor with every step. 60 people watched one woman cross that room. And not one of them made a sound. She passed the third row. Kessler saw her. At first it was just a face. A familiar face. And his brain took a second to place it. Then, another second. Then it hit him all at once. Like a truck coming through a wall. His mouth came open. His hands gripped the armrests. The color drained out of his face. Not slowly. All at once. Like somebody had pulled a plug. He looked at Lund. Lund had already gone white as paper. Their eyes met, and in that single look, the two of them understood exactly what had happened. That was her. The woman from the lobby. The stray dog. The roach. The woman he had slapped across the face less than 24 hours ago was standing 10 feet away in a chief's uniform. Walking toward the podium, where she was about to be introduced as his commanding officer, Wade Kessler could not breathe. Okafor reached the front, thanked the county executive with a single nod, and turned to face the room. "I'm not here to make friends," she said. "I'm here because this department has lost the trust of the people it exists to protect. My job is to rebuild that trust from the inside out." She let a beat of silence do the work. "And I've already seen how some of you operate when you think nobody important is watching." She did not look at Kessler. She did not glance at the third row. She didn't have to. Every person in that room felt the weight of that sentence land. And Wade Kessler felt it most of all, starting today. Every complaint will be reviewed. Every use of force incident will be documented and investigated. Every interaction in this building, with civilians, with each other, with anyone who walks through that front door, will reflect the standard of this badge. She tapped her own chest. "Ons," over the badge. "I expect professionalism. I expect accountability. And I expect both of them starting now." She stepped back. Nobody applauded. The silence was thick enough to choke on. But on the far side of the room, Simone Carver sat up a little straighter. And for the first time in 7 years, something that looked a great deal like hope crossed her face. Danielle Okafor's first official act as chief was not a speech. It was not a policy memo. It was not a meet and greet with her command staff. It was a preservation order. Within 1 hour of that assembly, she signed a department-wide hold on all security footage and all body camera data from the previous 72 hours. Every camera, every angle, every second. Locked down. No overwrites. No deletions. No exceptions. She knew about the 48-hour auto-overwrite loop. She had read it in the department's technical manual before she ever set foot in Cedar Hollow, which meant the lobby footage from the morning of the slap was already on a countdown. Less than 20 hours left before it wrote itself into nothing. She didn't give it 20 minutes. The order hit Ray Duvall's desk before lunch. He read it twice. Then he walked to her office, knocked once, and stepped inside. "Chief, is this really necessary? The server costs alone. We don't have the storage to hold 72 hours across every camera in the building." She didn't look up from the file, open in front of her. "It's necessary. Sergeant." With respect. "Ma'am, we've never done a blanket hold before. It's going to raise questions." She looked up. "Is there a reason you'd prefer I didn't preserve it?" Duvall's mouth opened. Then it closed. He stood there for 3 full seconds. Long enough for the silence to say everything his words didn't. And then he turned and walked out. He went straight to his own office, shut the door, sat down, and for the first time in 23 years, Ray Duvall felt the ground move under his feet. Now, here is where a lesser story would let its hero take the shortcut. And I want to show you the moment Okafor refused it, because it is the whole spine of who she is. That afternoon, Deputy Chief Pell came to her office with a suggestion dressed up as advice. "Chief," he said, "you've got a bad apple. We all know it. You've got the authority. Why not just make the problem go away quietly? A clean termination. Effective today. No hearing. No investigation. No headlines. This whole thing is behind us by Friday." She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said. "If I fire that man without process, I win today and I lose the department. Because the next chief who sits in this chair will break the process to protect his friends. and he'll point at me when he does it. We do this clean, Marcus, all the way clean, even when it's slower, especially when it's slower. That is the answer to the question this whole genre is quietly built around. She had every right in the world to punish the man who had slapped her. She refused to do it the easy way, because the point was never her face. The point was the system. Then she did two things, both of them lawful, both of them ice cold in their patience. First, she referred the matter a racial slur and an act of excessive force by a sworn officer, followed by a deliberate failure to report to the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice. As chief, that referral was hers to make. It was clean. It was documented. Remember that she did it. Because in about 20 minutes of screen time, it is going to matter more than anything else in this story. Second, she brought in an independent investigator, a woman named Naomi Brandt, 21 years, certified through the state's Peace Officer Standards Board, with no friendships in Ashford County, no debts, no reason to protect anyone. Okafor had worked with her years before on a case that ended with 3 officers indicted and a chief pushed into early retirement. She trusted her completely. More importantly, she trusted her to be independent. They met in Okafor's office with the door closed. Okafor handed her the satchel, the appointment order, the handwritten timeline she'd built in the hotel, the photographs of her own swollen face taken that night in the bathroom mirror. Brandt read through all of it without speaking. When she finished, she looked up. "You're the complainant, Brandt said, and a witness, which means you cannot be anywhere near this investigation." "I know," Okafor said. "That's why you're here. This is your case." "Naomi, not mine. I'm stepping back completely. I won't review your findings until they're final. I won't sit in on a single interview. I won't touch it. Whatever you find, you report it to me and to the county executive at the same time." She slid the satchel across the desk. "I recuse myself. Fully," Brandt nodded, and picked up the file and got to work. Her first stop was the footage. The ceiling camera showed exactly what Okafor had described. Kessler stopping, the exchange, the grab, the strike, Okafor absorbing it, Kessler walking away. But the ceiling camera had no audio. The slap was visible. The word was not. So Brandt went looking for a second source. And she found her in the department's own sign-in sheet, Deb Alderton, the civilian on the bench. She'd written her name, her number, and her reason for visiting. It took Brandt one phone call. Deb was nervous when Brandt came to her house, kept glancing at the front door like someone might be listening. But when Brandt explained that the investigation was independent, that her name would be protected, Deb went quiet for a moment and then said, "I didn't know if anybody would care." "I care," Brandt said. "That's why I'm here." And Deb showed her the video. The phone had been sitting flat on her lap, screen out, recording from 15 feet away. The angle was low and tilted, but the audio was crystalline. It caught everything the ceiling camera missed. The stray dog line, Okafor's steady replies, and then, low and vicious and unmistakable, the word Kessler had muttered right before his palm connected. Brandt sat very still, listening to it a second time. Then she asked for a copy, and Deb handed the phone over without hesitation. "Take it," she said. "Whatever you need. Somebody ought to see this. 2 angles now. One with audio." And then Simone Carver walked in on her own. She didn't wait to be called. She requested a formal meeting through the department's own channels, walked into the interview room, sat down, took a breath, and started talking. "I've been here 7 years. I've watched Kessler do a version of this at least 5 times. Not always his hands. Sometimes, it's how he talks to black residents. How he decides who's suspicious and who isn't. The lobby. Though, that was the worst I've ever seen. And I stood in that doorway and I did nothing. She pulled out her phone and showed Brandt the screenshot of the empty incident log. I took this because I knew the report would never exist. It never does. It always disappears on Sergeant Duval's desk. She gave names. Dates. She described the culture. How complaints were routed. How deputies who spoke up got frozen out of good shifts and good assignments. And when she was done, Brandt asked her one question. Why now? Carver didn't hesitate. Because someone finally walked into this building who might actually do something about it. Then came the piece that turned a strong case into an unbreakable one. Kessler's body camera, the device itself, hadn't recorded the incident. Kessler had made sure of that. In his interview, sitting beside his union rep Del Swords, he leaned on it hard. My camera malfunctioned that morning, he said. The battery? These units don't hold a charge like they used to. Cold weather does a number on them. Swords had coached him well. Deny. Minimize. Blame the equipment. But a body camera does not only record video, it records itself. Every button press. Every power cycle. Every mute. All of it timestamped down to the second in metadata that most officers don't even know exists. And when Brandt pulled Kessler's metadata for that morning, it did not show a malfunction. It did not show a dead battery. It showed a manual deactivation. The button, pressed and held for 3 seconds, and the timestamp on that deactivation was 40 seconds before the ceiling camera showed Kessler crossing the lobby toward Danielle Okafor. Read that again in your head. He didn't fumble the camera. The camera didn't fail. 40 seconds before he touched her. Wade Kessler reached up and deliberately shut off the one device designed to keep him honest. That is not the metadata of an accident. That is the metadata of a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. Brandt laid it out in the interview. The ceiling footage, Deb's audio, Carver's log, and then the metadata. She played none of it as a gotcha. She simply set it on the table, one piece at a time, and let it stack. When she got to the metadata, Swords leaned over and whispered something in Kessler's ear. Kessler's face did not move, but his hands did. They gripped the edge of the table until the knuckles went white. Officer Kessler, Brandt said, would you like to revise your statement about the camera? Kessler said nothing. Not another word. For the rest of the interview, he sat in silence while Swords did the talking. And Swords did not have much left to say. Toby Lund's interview came next. And without Kessler in the room, Lund was a different man. Smaller. Quieter. He started with the script. I was assisting my partner. I followed his lead. And Brandt let him finish. Then she said the thing that cracked him open. Deputy Lund. Under state law, failure to intervene during an act of excessive force carries the same disciplinary weight as the act itself. You were standing 3 feet away. You saw the strike. You heard the word. And you did nothing. That makes you an accessory. Lund asked for a break. When he came back, his tone had completely changed. He described Kessler's pattern. The shortcuts. The way he talked to black civilians. The intimidation. He confirmed the slur. He confirmed the slap was deliberate. And then he said the words Brandt had been waiting for. I didn't stop him. Lund said, staring at the table. I should have stopped him. I should have stopped him about 10 times now. And I never did. The last internal piece was Duval. Brandt pulled his supervisory records going back 5 years. And what she found was a pattern so clean it looked engineered. Every complaint against Kessler, all 11 of them, routed through Duval's desk. Every single one closed as unfounded. Average investigation time: 4 days. Average documentation: less than 1 page. No witness interviews. No follow-up. A signature and a stamp. And then Brandt talked to Rhonda. 11 years behind the glass. Who confirmed everything Carver had said. Kessler had done this before. Not this bad. And Duval always made it go away. Then Rhonda said something that made Brandt stop writing and look up. The morning it happened, Rhonda said. The morning that woman came in. Chief Estes was supposed to be here by 7. He's always in by 7. But that day, he didn't show until almost 9. I thought it was strange. Brandt pulled Duval's department phone records. And there it was. A text from Ray Duval to Gordon Estes. Sent the night before at 11:47. The message was short. Don't rush in tomorrow. Take your time. I've got the morning covered. Estes had been the only person in that department who knew Danielle Okafor was coming. And Ray Duval had made sure the one man who could have recognized her was nowhere near the building when she walked in. Brandt couldn't prove Duval knew exactly who Okafor was, but she could prove, in black and white, that he had deliberately kept the one person who could have identified her away from the door, whether that was sabotage or the world's ugliest coincidence. The timestamp made the answer pretty clear. The case was, by any reasonable standard, finished. 2 camera angles, audio of the slur, metadata proving premeditation, a pattern going back 5 years, a supervisor's fingerprints on every buried complaint, and a text message that reeked of sabotage. Naomi Brandt compiled it all into a single report. And it was airtight. And that is exactly when the machine woke up, because Wade Kessler was not going to fight this alone. Swords and the union filed a formal grievance, and it was a clever one. They didn't argue the facts. The facts were gone. Instead, they argued the process. They called Okafor's plainclothes test an act of entrapment. They argued that the preservation order and the metadata pull had been executed under an improper posture, that Kessler's rights under his workplace protections had been trampled, and they filed a motion to suppress the entire body of evidence. Every angle, every recording, all of it, and Marcus Pell moved at the same time. From the inside, working with Commissioner Barnett, whose budget committee held the department's purse strings, Pell pushed through an administrative reorganization. Overnight, the internal affairs and professional standards functions were dissolved and folded into a newly created Office of Constitutional Policing, which reported, of all people, to Marcus Pell. And under that reorganization, Naomi Brandt was pulled off the case, reassigned. Conflict of interest, they said. A woman with a bulletproof file was administratively lifted out of the chair and set down somewhere she couldn't touch it. And the vice began to close on Simone Carver, too. Her shifts changed. Her requests got denied. Word went around the bullpen that she was a rat. And the good assignments dried up. The one deputy who had finally found her voice was being quietly punished for using it. Here is the moment the whole thing looked lost. And I mean lost, because Wade Kessler was never going to beat the evidence. The evidence was overwhelming, and everyone knew it. What Kessler figured out, what Pell and Barnett figured out for him, was that you don't have to beat the evidence. You just have to beat the system that's supposed to process it. The investigator was gone. The evidence was under a motion to suppress. The Internal Affairs Unit had been dissolved and rebuilt under the control of one of the men it was supposed to be investigating. Kessler was quietly put back on desk duty, pending resolution of the procedural questions. His paychecks kept coming. And Danielle Okafor, the new chief, found herself boxed out of the very case she'd been slapped into. Unable to touch it, watching a man reorganize accountability out of existence right in front of her. And then Hollis Barnett decided to twist the knife in person. He asked her to dinner. Not a real dinner. A massage. A quiet steakhouse on the edge of the county. A corner booth. A man who had outlasted 3 chiefs and wanted her to know it. He ordered for both of them without asking. He talked about the weather, about the budget cycle, about how hard it was to keep good people in a rural department. And then he set down his fork and got to it. You're new here, Danielle. So let me give you something for free. This county has a rhythm. It had one before you got here. And it'll have one after you're gone. The people who last are the people who learn the rhythm. He smiled. The practiced smile of a man who had never once been told no by anyone whose paycheck he controlled. There's a version of this where that unfortunate business in the lobby gets resolved through the appropriate procedural channels. Everybody keeps their dignity. And you and I have a long and productive working relationship. And there's a version where you keep pushing. And you find out just how little a chief can do with a department that has no budget, no unit, and no friends on the commission. He picked the fork back up. I'd hate to see a talented woman spend her whole tenure signing overtime slips and losing every vote that matters. Think about the rhythm. Okafor did not raise her voice. She never did. She set down her own fork, folded her hands on the table, and looked at him the way she had looked at Kessler in that lobby. Level. Unmoving. Commissioner. I've spent 19 years learning the rhythm of buildings exactly like this one. And here's what I know that you don't. The rhythm you're describing isn't culture. It's a crime scene that's been running so long everybody forgot it was a crime scene. She stood and picked up her coat and left the steak untouched. Enjoy your dinner. I'll enjoy the rhythm. It was a good exit. But make no mistake, when she walked out of that steakhouse, she was losing. Barnett had the money. Pell had the unit. Swords had the motion. And she had a report nobody would let her use. It was 2:47 in the morning when she sat alone in her office. The appointment order and the photographs of her own bruised face spread out on the desk in front of her, and let herself feel, for one honest minute, that she had walked into a machine older and meaner and better connected than she was. She had done everything right. She had done everything clean. And clean was losing. She picked up the phone and called Naomi Brandt. They've got you off it, Okafor said. They've got the evidence tied up. They've got Pell running the shop now. And Barnett just told me to my face that he'll starve this department to the studs before he lets it touch one of his people. A pause. Tell me I didn't just get an entire department's worth of good people burned for nothing. Brandt was quiet for a moment. And then she said, the thing that changed everything. Danielle, what did you do on day 1? Before any of this. The very first thing. Okafor sat up. The DOJ referral. Here is what Pell and Barnett and Kessler and Duval had all missed. Because men who have never faced a consequence never learned to look up the chain. Danielle Okafor had, on her first afternoon, lawfully referred this matter to the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice, which meant that from that afternoon forward, this was not merely an internal personnel matter in a county building. It was a matter under federal notice. And when Pell dissolved the Internal Affairs Unit, and Barnett leaned on the budget to do it, and the union coordinated a motion to bury the evidence, they had not simply protected a bad cop. They had, all of them together, taken deliberate administrative action to obstruct and suppress an investigation that they knew, or should have known, was already the subject of a federal civil rights inquiry. That is a federal crime. Obstruction. And you cannot reorganize your way out of it. Because there is no budget committee in Cedar Hollow with jurisdiction over the Department of Justice. The very move they made to save themselves was the move that finished them. They didn't just fail to bury the body. They picked up a shovel in front of a federal witness and dug themselves a second grave. Kessler built the weapon that killed his protectors, and his protectors handed it to the one agency none of them could touch. And Hollis Barnett, sitting in that steakhouse, threatening a woman with his budget, had just described, out loud, to the person who had already called the federal government, exactly what he intended to do to obstruct a federal case. Within the week, the DOJ opened a formal investigation, not just into Kessler's slap, but into the suppression, into Pell, into the reorganization, into a county commissioner who had used a public safety budget to make a civil rights complaint disappear. And once federal attorneys started pulling threads, the whole tapestry came apart in their hands. The motion to suppress collapsed, because the moment the reorganization was exposed as an obstruction effort, the procedural questions it had raised were revealed for exactly what they were. Brandt was reinstated. The evidence came back to life. And the men who had built the machine turned on each other with a speed that would have been funny if it weren't so ugly, because the brotherhood, it turned out, was never real. It had never been loyalty. It had only ever been shared guilt. And shared guilt evaporates the instant the bill comes due. When the federal investigators sat Ray Duvall down, the man who had spent 23 years protecting Wade Kessler needed less than 60 seconds to throw him overboard. Kessler was a known problem. Duvall said, I flagged him repeatedly. I raised concerns. It's all in my supervisory notes. It was a lie. And the 4-day, one-page case files with his signature at the bottom of every one proved it was a lie. And Pell, hauled in next, was already drafting a statement about how he had always had reservations about the men beneath him. And Barnett, the untouchable one, the man off the org chart, started returning calls from a lawyer instead of a fixer, because somewhere in a federal field office there was now a recording device pointed at his rhythm. The seawall Wade Kessler thought he was standing behind was made of men. And men run. And through all of it, one more time, Okafor was offered the shortcut, a county attorney, eager to make the federal headache go away. Floated a deal. Everyone resigns quietly. The whole thing gets sealed. No admission. No record. No. She said. Again. No seal. No quiet resignations. This happened in the open. And it gets resolved in the open. If I let them buy their way into silence now, then every deputy in this county learns that the only real crime is getting caught by someone who happens to outrank you. We do this clean. And we do it where people can see it. She did not break the process to win. Not when she was losing at 2:47 in the morning. And not when she was winning. That, more than the badge, more than the uniform, is why she is the chief, and Wade Kessler is a defendant. The disciplinary hearing was held 9 days after the slap. No cameras. No press in the room. Just a closed conference room on the second floor of the Ashford County Police Department. A long table at the front. Chairs in rows. The kind of room where careers end quietly. Okafor sat at the head of it. Not as a witness. Not as a victim. But as the chief, the ranking officer of the department, the person with the authority to decide what happened next. Priya Anand sat to her right. Naomi Brandt sat to her left. The completed investigation file open in front of her. Del Soward sat in the front row with a legal pad and a very tight jaw. But here is the thing nobody in that room said out loud. And here is why this morning was different from every quiet hearing that had ever ended a career in that building. Down in the parking lot, in the gray light before 8 o'clock, 2 unmarked sedans and a black SUV had pulled in and parked in the visitor spaces near the front doors. Nobody got out right away. They didn't have to. Federal agents do not knock until they are ready to knock. And so, For the length of that hearing, there were two walls closing on Wade Kessler at the same time. One inside, made of a chief and a file and a recording, and one outside, made of the United States government. Sitting patient in the cold, waiting for the door to open, Wade Kessler was brought in first. He walked in wearing his uniform for the last time, though he didn't know it yet, and sat down across from Brandt. His face was blank, not calm, empty. The face of a man who had spent 9 days watching the walls come in and had finally run out of room. Brandt presented the findings, methodical and unhurried. And then she played it. The ceiling footage, Deb Alderton's audio, Kessler's own voice filling that small, quiet room, the stray dog line, the word, and then the slap, that sharp crack that sounded even louder in there than it had in the lobby. A couple of the command staff along the wall flinched at the sound. Kessler did not. He had heard it before. He was the one who made it. Then Brandt set down the last piece. And this was the one that changed the temperature of the room. She laid Kessler's body camera metadata flat on the table, turned it so he could see it, and put one finger on a single line. "This is the deactivation," she said, quietly. "Manual." Button held 3 seconds. "And this is the timestamp." She moved her finger. 40 seconds before you cross that lobby. You want everyone in this room to understand what that means. So I'll say it plainly. He did not lose his temper. A man who loses his temper does not turn off his camera 40 seconds early. He decided. He turned off the one witness he thought he could control. And then he went looking for the woman he'd already decided to put in her place. That is not a use of force incident. That is a plan. The room was silent. Sawards did not object. Because there was nothing to object to. It was just a timestamp. And a timestamp does not have a temper. Or a bad day. Or 13 years of loyal service. It just tells you what a man did. And when. Swords tried anyway. It was his job to try. He stood. And he made the argument they had been building for 9 days. This entire matter, he said, originated in an entrapment. The chief entered this building in disguise, concealed her identity, and manufactured a confrontation for the express purpose of testing my client. Officer Kessler was set up. You cannot discipline a man for failing a trap that was laid specifically to catch him. And Danielle Okafor spoke for the first time. She had been silent the whole hearing. And when she spoke, the room turned toward her like a field of grass in the wind. "Counselor, I want to make sure I understand the defense. Your client's position is that he would not have grabbed and struck a woman in this lobby if he had known she was important." She let that hang. "That's not a defense. That's a confession. You cannot entrap a man into choosing to be decent. There was no trick. There was no bait. The test was the simplest one there is. Would a sworn officer of this department treat an ordinary citizen, a woman with no title and no leverage, with the bare minimum of human dignity when he thought no one was watching? That was the whole test. And your client answered it. Loudly. On tape. She looked at Kessler then. For the first time, and her voice did not rise a single degree, the tragedy isn't that he failed a test, Mr. Swords. The tragedy is how many people he did this to before there was a camera on the bench. This one just happened to be the one time the room was full of evidence instead of empty of witnesses. Swords sat down. He did not have anywhere else to go. Okafor, let the silence settle. And then she said it the way you read a verdict. Deputy Kessler, based on the sustained findings of this investigation, the use of excessive force against a civilian, a documented racial slur, the deliberate deactivation of your body camera prior to the assault, and a deliberate failure to report, you are terminated from the Ashford County Police Department effective immediately. She did not raise her voice. She did not slow down for emphasis. Your personnel file and this full investigation report will be forwarded to the State Peace Officer Standards Board for the revocation of your certification. You will never again wear this badge. Or any badge. In this state, and your conduct is now part of an active federal civil rights investigation. Whatever happens in this room is the smallest thing that is going to happen to you today. Kessler sat still for a long time. 10 seconds. Maybe more. And then he reached up, unclipped his badge, and set it down on the table. Click. It was the loudest sound in the room. Louder than the recording. Louder than her voice. The small, flat, final sound of a badge hitting a table. He did not look at Okafor. He did not look at anyone. He stood up, and he walked out of that conference room, and down the stairs, and out through the front doors of the Ashford County Police Department. And that is where the two walls met. Because the moment Wade Kessler stepped out into the gray morning air, the doors of those unmarked cars opened. He stopped on the top step. He looked at the men crossing the lot toward him, at the badges on their belts that were a great deal bigger than the one he'd just set down. And for 1 second, one long second, he understood everything all at once. The lobby, the camera, the metadata, the referral he never knew about, made on an afternoon he never thought about, by a woman he'd called a roach. He understood that there had never been a door out. There had only ever been the illusion of one, and he had walked straight through it into open air, into a photograph. They read him his rights on the courthouse steps a few weeks later. After the indictment came down under the federal civil rights statute, and the same hands that had grabbed Danielle Okafor's arm and slapped her across the face were cuffed behind his back. In front of the cameras. In front of the county. In front of everyone. The cuffs I promised you in the very first minute. They were always coming. They just took 9 days. One slap. And a self-inflicted federal crime to arrive. And then the wall came for the rest of them. One after another. And it did not stop. Ray Duval was next. Brandt laid out the pattern. 5 years of complaints buried. Minimal documentation. No follow-up. And then, the 11:47 text message. The deliberate sabotage of the chief's own arrival. Duval didn't argue. He didn't explain. He sat there like a man watching his house burn from across the street. He was stripped of his rank, suspended without pay, and named in the federal obstruction case. Every complaint he had supervised in 5 years was ordered reopened and reviewed by an independent panel. And his pension eligibility was placed under audit. 23 years of looking the other way. And it all came down to a Thursday morning in a room with no windows. Marcus Pell was forced out and named in the federal filing. The Office of Constitutional Policing. The shell he had built to swallow the investigation was dissolved before it ever held a single meeting. And the man who had reorganized accountability out of existence discovered that the paperwork he'd signed to do it was now the clearest evidence of intent in the entire obstruction case. He had signed his own name to the crime. And Hollis Barnett, the untouchable one, the man off the org chart, the man who chaired the budget committee and told a new chief over a steak dinner that she should learn the rhythm. Barnett fell the hardest. Because Barnett had the farthest to fall, he was referred to the State Ethics Commission and named in the same federal investigation, and every favor he had traded for 15 years became a thread that federal attorneys could pull. He resigned his chairmanship in a 2-line letter, and then he resigned his seat, and then he stopped returning anyone's calls at all. He had spent a career being the one who kept the lights on for everybody else. He learned, at the very end, that the Department of Justice does not care who signs the electric bill. Toby Lund was last, and he walked in looking like he hadn't slept in a week. Probably hadn't. Brandt entered his cooperation into the record as a mitigating factor. His willingness to break from Kessler's account, his confirmation of the pattern. Okafor looked at him for a long moment before she spoke. Deputy Lund, you are suspended without pay for 60 days. On your return, you will complete a mandatory retraining program and serve a 2-year supervised probation. Any sustained finding during that probation results in immediate termination. She paused. You had a choice in that lobby. You saw what was happening. You could have stopped it. And you didn't. And that failure doesn't disappear because you cooperated after the fact. She let that sit. But I'm giving you something Wade Kessler never earned. A second chance. Do not waste it. Lund nodded, still staring at the table. And then he stood, walked to the door, stopped, and turned around. I'm sorry, Chief. His voice cracked on the last word. Okafor nodded once. That was all. But firing bad cops was only ever half the job. The other half was making sure the machine could never rebuild itself. Within 2 weeks, Okafor rolled out a full reform package. Mandatory body cameras in all public areas of the building, with tamper metadata reviewed weekly, a civilian complaint review process with an independent oversight board, revised use of force protocols requiring documentation within 1 hour of any physical contact, bias training led by external facilitators, not internal staff, and a mentorship program pairing veteran officers with community liaisons. The State Oversight Board, which had been monitoring Ashford County since the audit, noted the changes in its next quarterly report. For the first time in 3 years, the report did not use the word deficient, and Simone Carver was promoted to sergeant. She stood in the same briefing room where Okafor had been introduced, and Okafor pinned the insignia on her collar herself. I spent 7 years afraid to speak, Carver said quietly. I don't want anyone else in this department to ever feel that way. Then make sure they don't, Okafor said. Deb Alderton received a formal letter from the department, an apology for what she'd witnessed, a thank you for her courage. She pinned it to her refrigerator and told her neighbor, I almost didn't say anything. I'm so glad I did. Now, I need you to hear this next part clearly, because it's the part everybody gets wrong. The federal indictment, the decertifications, the obstruction charges, the commissioner who lost everything, the reforms, those are not the victory. Those are the consequence. The victory was Simone Carver. After 7 years of silence, deciding to knock on the right door. The victory was Deb Alderton. On a hard plastic bench, quietly pressing record because she believed somebody should be watching, even when nobody else would. One woman at the top opened the door, but the people who actually walked through it and burned the old system down were ordinary people who chose courage over comfort. That is the truth. This genre doesn't want to say out loud. Justice does not come down from a single hero with a badge. It comes up from people with no power at all. One small act of courage at a time. 6 months later, the Ashford County Police Department looked like the same building. Same scuffed linoleum. Same flickering fluorescent tube. Same bulletproof glass. But it did not feel the same. There was a civilian liaison desk near the front now, a feedback box on the wall, a posted code of conduct that people actually read. Deputies greeted the people who walked in, not because a memo told them to, but because after everything, ignoring a frightened person had started to feel wrong. It wasn't perfect. Some deputies resented her. A few transferred out, but the ones who stayed were beginning to trust her. She walked to the building every morning, learned names, asked about families, reviewed complaints, not to bury them, to follow them. And one afternoon, a young deputy knocked on her door and asked her advice on how to handle a domestic call in a neighborhood he'd never worked. A year ago, He would have asked Wade Kessler. Now he was asking her. That was the change. Not headlines. Not awards. Just a kid in uniform knocking on the right door. At the end of a long day, Danielle Okafor put on her coat and walked out through the front entrance. The same door she'd been shoved toward 6 months before. She stopped for a second and looked at the lobby. At the bench where Deb had been sitting, at the exact spot on the linoleum where Wade Kessler had grabbed her arm, she didn't feel anger. She didn't feel triumph. She felt something quieter than both. Something like proof. Proof that the worst morning of her career had become the first morning of something better. But here is where I have to be honest with you. And here is where the story stops being comfortable. This story ends well. It ends with a badge on a table, and a promotion, and an apology on a refrigerator. And it ends well for one reason. And one reason only. The woman who got slapped in that lobby happened to be the one person in the building holding a chief's badge in her pocket. The next person shoved through that door won't be. The next person who gets grabbed by the arm and called a stray dog in a public building might be exactly who they appear to be. Someone with no title. No badge. No leverage. No 40-second head start on a federal case. Someone whose 2 seconds of closed eyes and clenched jaw is not the calm before a reckoning. It's just pain. Absorbable. With no one watching. And no camera on the bench. And no one who ever hears about it at all. So before you go, I want to leave you with the only question that actually matters. Because there was a person in that lobby who could have stopped all of it in the first 10 seconds. A clerk behind glass. A deputy in a doorway. A partner 3 feet away. Any one of them. And every one of them went quiet. So ask yourself, honestly, when you go quiet, when you tell yourself it isn't your fight, that someone else will handle it, that saying something will only make it worse for you, who are you really protecting, the person being hurt or the person doing the hurting? And if that door opened tomorrow and you were standing 3 feet away, would you move? Tell me in the comments. I read them. If this story stayed with you, do me a favor and hit like, share it with somebody who needs to hear it, and subscribe. Because I've got another one coming that you are not going to believe. Because your silence, in the end, is never just silence. It's always a choice. This is a work of fiction. All names, characters, agencies, and events are invented, and any resemblance to real people, departments, or incidents is entirely coincidental.